Hi, Arthur.
Hello,
Well-
Angela.
You have been moderating for the last 3 days, and you have been in the energy world for decades. What's your big takeaway from the last 3 days of World Energy Week?
I would say that the two words I would use, complexity and refreshing. And the reason I would highlight those is that, there's no doubt as we think about transition, whether it's societal, as we've just talked about, or energy, there's an enormous complexity that sometimes is brushed under the carpet. I get somewhat agitated at events where we think we're going to light switch our way to something that's new, when we think about the trillions of dollars, the issues in developing parts of the world, etc. So I don't think anyone shied away from that complexity. I don't think anyone shied away from the understanding of the depth of change that will be needed. But I also felt encouraged that people were realistic about what needed to happen on that. But sometimes, if I admit, on conferences like this, you can come away quite depressed because the complexity and the scale of change is so enormous that you just don't know where you're going to go next intellectually and thinking. But actually, on day one, you introduced stories, as part of the World Energy Council. And I found that refreshing. And I found it really interesting how, that changes the discussion and the debate. You've been, using your platform of humanizing energy for, a number of years now. And it kind of came alive for me in terms of the stories. And I know Betty Sue talks about the importance of stories, and I absolutely believe in that. But, you can say the importance of stories, but what does it actually mean? And now through the BBC, you have a series of stories that I think energize communities, energize individuals, and get us thinking about the energy transition in a very different way. So they were my reflections. Complexity doesn't go away. Never thought it would do. It is a bit daunting at one level, but if we could only tap into the kind of the intellectual power and the energy and emotional power of those stories, I think we'll be in a better place. And I think, it's fantastic that the council is platforming that as part of, your desire and positioning for the council as you go forward. So they were my takeaways.
Fantastic. I like those takeaways. I really do. I think we're actually tapping into people power. Right? We've talked an awful lot about technology and investment side and supply side choices, and I was interested in that last session where we were talking about tipping points and all the technology. The economist comes on and says, we've had a lot of technology tipping points, it's about cost and value, and then somebody comes along and says it's about sustainability, a conceptual tipping point. And then I tweaked it out and said, is it now a societal tipping point? Because I've heard the word democratization a lot.
Yep. Not
just decentralization, digitalization and decarbonisation, but democratization. This has come out as a theme, but not in a simple way. Democratization around ownership, democratization about leadership, and democratization, I think, I'll look at my last note, I had another D and I've completely forgotten that. Oh, design, right?
Yes.
What have you heard this
Yes,
theme?
no, I think, democratization of energy is a theme that goes back many, many years. I mean, it's been talked about, but I've never really understood what it meant. I mean, it's a lovely strap line, but actually when we heard it on day one as part of the stories, I think it was the electrolysis hydrogen story that we had a brief insight into. They talked about democratization because of the access that it allows individuals to have to different ways of accessing energy in that way. But again, as you said, democratization for me, that's interesting in its own right. Yes, we all become prosumers, we all become energy producers, but actually there's an awful lot that needs to happen behind that from a democratization point of view. And digital plays a part in that, because you're not going to get democratization of energy sources unless there's some platform around which we can all access, communicate, and then ultimately regulate this as well. And that democratization I quite enjoy, because at the moment regulation is this kind of area of energy that exists for some policy makers, often, far off to the left as far as we're concerned. But here are individuals talking about what they need to be able to make this happen. And there are voices, they're the individual voices that you talked about. I think the sooner we can get those voices into the regulation discussion, the better we'll be for it.
Yeah.
Because I think often regulators are flying blind. They're trying to catch up and they want access to insight. And this is one of the ways I think they'll get it.
I think it's, for me, the third D I had was the democratization of storytelling. If these stories can be collected and harvested, then that helps us with regulation. I'm going to give you an R now. I've given you a D.
Okay.
So I often, we hear a lot about reduce, recycle, reuse, but circular carbon economy comes in and it brings remove in. And we also heard a lot about resilience.
Yes, so I think I actually was quite pleased that we had remove in the equation, because again, as I mentioned in my previous session, often at an energy event, we have a challenge in the hydrocarbon industry, which is that we are seen as I said, part of the problem, and yet we need to be positioned as part of the solution. And the only way we're going to be part of the solution in the hydrocarbon industry is if the industry is moving at pace with regard to the removal of emissions from the hydrocarbon value chain. There is absolutely no way that they can have a place at the table unless that happens. Everyone knows this, there's nothing new about this. But again, I was pushing on remove a little bit. There's a price to pay for remove. And often, basically the debate and the discussion assumes, there's going to be a price of carbon, yes or no. Is there the political will to bring it in, yes or no? And I absolutely believe that remove needs to link itself with a price. We need to understand how that price is going to be paid for, so the democratization of the narrative would be helpful, because often actually we don't get to that discussion. We get to, oh look, direct air capture is going to happen. Oh look, CCUS pilots happening there, but it's not happening at the pace and the scale. But the industry absolutely needs to get behind this. I think it wants to. I think it needs to be linked in with discussion with regard to the price of carbon and how we manage that. And resilience then, I think, fits into that, because again, resilience is a critical word for us here in the UK as of today, because we have an energy system which is clearly not resilient, or potentially not resilient, because we haven't thought through the implications of what resilience actually means. Now, these are intellectual and real debates, which is resilience going to be created by the market? We've clearly seen that isn't the case for the gas market here in the UK. Is resilience going to be created by government intervention? Again, there's good and bad stories to that. Or is resilience actually going to come? I think what we heard on day one, it is resilience comes when public, private and civil society come together in terms of the discussion on energy transition and understand what resilience means. At the moment, we compartmentalize these debates into public policy, private or the citizen. They need to come together, in my opinion.
I have 3 more letters of the alphabet to work through, but I'm looking at time. That we heard the 4 I's, innovation, integration, infrastructure and implementation. And I think we need implementation with adaptation and imagination.
Adaptation and imagination. We just need shovels in the ground.
Shovels in the ground.
We need to break ground on an awful lot of what needs to happen on energy transition. We've had announcements, a lot of announcements over the last 2 years, and we heard this. We've had announcement from industrial, large industrial complexes are now declaring net zero, et cetera, et cetera. This is all great. This is completely different, but stuff needs to happen. And with not enough of that. So implementation, absolutely.
But maybe not just with shovels.
No,
toolkit.
Whole
so
toolkit,
we don't all become diggers.
But you know what I mean. I mean,
that's the imagination.
And if it can come with imagination and it can come with adaptation, I'm absolutely for that.
Then I had the C's. We heard a lot about COVID and climate. We heard a lot about customer centricity, community cooperation, choices in recovery, and then a very interesting thing about computing in that last session around the speed of transition and the role of the speed of digitalization.
Yeah, I think we've this is not the first time that we've talked about digitalization and digitization of the energy system, and undoubtedly it's there. I mean, you know, in the context of the platforms are there, the technology's there, but there are challenges to that, and there are challenges, and we heard this on day one, there are challenges to trust. There are challenges to ownership of data. There are challenges to how data is shared and used in the way that we need to go forward. And there's also just the reality that in many developed countries, legacy systems aren't digital as of today. And there's an awful lot of investment that is still needed. So are we going digital? Absolutely. Does everyone accept we're going digital? Absolutely. Has COVID-19 and the pandemic accelerated that? Absolutely. But there's still a lot of work, I believe, that needs to be done to truly digitalize the energy system.
And now my favourite letter, because I was counting the others, 5 or 6 Ds, 4 or 5 Rs, whatever, but the Ps. There are so many Ps. Pandemic, policy, prices, public-private partnership. And then we started hearing about prosumers. Productive energy access, not just basic, fierce partnerships, peak globalization, and paradigm and policy shifts.
Wow, where to start? Well, I'm going to start with fierce partnerships. I liked those 2 words from the mayor of a remote place in Alaska. I can't remember the name. Sorry. Anyway, if it does begin with C. I have seen a program on that. Anyway, but fierce partnerships. I absolutely love that as a statement. It remained in my mind, and I do think one of the things you talked about collaboration as part of one of your alphabet soup that you're throwing at me at the moment. But collaboration will be absolutely critical. We heard about it in the context of hydrogen. We heard about it in the last session. We heard about it in the context of removal as far as carbon is concerned. Knowledge collaboration, technical collaboration, but also when we think about collaboration in regions in terms of access to energy supply. And again, one of the learning points for me of the last few days was Central Asia, Kazakhstan, its role as a connecting point. A lot I didn't know about that, shame on me, but also it highlighted that when we thought about that part of the world in Central Asia, the connectivity of electrification will be absolutely critical. We know about the gas pipelines and other pipelines, but actually it was the electrification collaboration, if I can call that, across regions, which I thought would be a fundamental change. And I think Paddy's last session on that, where he talked about the emergence of these superhighways of electrons, I think, very much visionary in that way, but it's not that far off. And I think, fierce partnerships will enable our ability to electrify the energy system sooner rather than later.
Super. I learnt Kazakhstan's number 3 in blockchain. There you go. Bitcoin mining.
Yeah,
that was a big surprise to me.
I agree.
Okay, so what did I miss?
I don't think you missed anything, to be honest with you. I think one of the key things that has come out for me is this, and I applaud the council for pushing this, is the role of the individual. And I think that's so important when we think about this debate. I mean, I say that mainly because someone like myself, who has been in the industry way too long, goes to major events where we talk about supply a lot and we talk about demand, but in a very kind of macro sense. Where is the demand market? China, the demand market; India, the demand market; Indonesia, coal. And we don't take it down to the changes that need to take place at the role of the individual. So for me, just all of the stories that came out around that were one of the critical things that I felt was here. And I think the other aspect that came through that I've got, here is connecting communities. And you mentioned that in your Cs. I think, we often view this as one community and what can we do, but actually we heard, and not just in this particular 3 days, but in others as well, cities are now connecting and sharing knowledge in a way that I think is going to be vitally important as we go forward. So overall, I learnt a lot over the last 3 days, some fantastic discussions, some seminal moments. I did like the certainty of uncertainty as a headline. I think that pretty well characterizes where we are at the moment, and therefore the debate and discussion that we've had over the last 3 days, I think, helps us navigate these very uncertain times.
Thank you. Super to have you with us, and I hope everybody else takes as much out of the last 3 days as we got out of it. It was rich, and I am still digesting.
Well, thank you, Angela. We are going to switch gears now to our closing remarks. Are we running a video or are we going straight to closing remarks? Okay, we're going to run a video. Sorry about that. We're going to run the video and then we'll come back. and the chair of the World Energy Council, Jean-Marie Daugé, will make his comments, and then I'll finish off with some final remarks and also some reminders about next year in St. Petersburg, networking, social media, and all of our usual stuff that we need to go through. So video play, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.